Venezuelan Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza denounced the latest round of US sanctions. Brazilian oil workers have won a court battle for temporary suspension of mass layoffs. The 31st Inter-Sessional Meeting of the Conference of Heads of Government of the Caribbean Community started this Tuesday in Barbados. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, I'm Katrina Goss. We begin in Barbados, where the 31st Inter-Sessional Meeting of the Conference of Heads of Government of the Caribbean Community started on Tuesday. Leaders gathered in Barbados to discuss the region's agenda in the face of the COVID-19 outbreak, the improvement of relations with the African continent, as well as the CARICOM single market. During the meeting, the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, called to strengthen the unity of the region, stressing that CARICOM member states are a single family that no one can tear apart, despite their internal political differences.
Capable of defending our causes and our future and our development is us, ourselves. We may not do it overnight. We may not do it in a year. We may not even do it in a decade. But if we recognize that this integration movement is one of the most successful integration movements that was established in the 20th century, we then better appreciate the responsibility that we have to care it, to nurture it, and not to allow for any kind of political or diplomatic embolism to threaten its existence.
And Mottley, who is currently CARICOM chair, also recalled the historic importance of unity within the region as a mechanism to support each other in the struggle against oppression.
We stand here because those who fought in the 1930s and those who created the political institutions that flowed therefrom understood that without unity they could achieve nothing. But with unity they could turn back the mighty hands of global empires who sought to suppress people for centuries.
And CARICOM Secretary General Alan Chastanet called to act collectively to confront obstacles, including those related to global uncertainties and the devastating effects of climate change. He also addressed the situation in Venezuela, noting the dangers posed by foreign interference in the crisis.
Lack of resolution to the ongoing situation in Venezuela continues to concern us. So far, all efforts at mediation have failed. In fact, from all indications, conditions in Venezuela continue to deteriorate despite a recent lull, and this is likely to make finding a solution even harder. The involvement of outside forces in the controversy, however, could only escalate the crisis and make a resolution that more difficult, while at the same time testing and stressing our own attempt at a common position on that issue.
And meanwhile, Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, Dr. Keith Rowley, speaking on Sunday during a press conference prior to the CARICOM meeting, referred to an agreement with Venezuela that was blocked by US sanctions.
We have been working on a unitization with Venezuela for almost 20 years after we have discovered the Loran Manatee and other fields on our southern border. And we have been working on this for almost 20 years. And then recently, Venezuela got itself sanctioned by the United States, and that puts an end to that, because after 20 years, the Venezuelans cannot now move in the way that we were hoping from the first day we started out. So we have just got agreement with Venezuela, which is very significant for Trinidad and Tobago, saying, we agree that you can go ahead and exploit on your side, and we will do on our side. But that's a very unusual development, and it usually takes good cooperation between countries.
And Haitian President Jovenel Moise cancelled his trip to Barbados to participate in the CARICOM conference. Moise called off his participation in the 31st Inter-Sessional Meeting of the Caribbean Community, which had opened on Tuesday on Barbados, but according to Foreign Minister Bochet Edmond, he denied that the president had cancelled the trip due to demonstrations by the Haitian police, claiming the decision was motivated by meetings on the negotiations to reach a solution to the country's political crisis. The United States tightened its blockade on Venezuela on Tuesday by sanctioning a subsidiary of Russian oil firm Rosneft that President Donald Trump's administration claims is propping up the Venezuelan oil sector. The sanctions announced by the US Treasury Department increased the pressure on Russia to cut ties with Venezuela. The sanctions freeze assets of the Russian oil giant within the US and punish global partners of Rosneft, as well as Didier Casimiro, the firm's chairman of the board of directors and president. And Venezuelan Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza responded to the latest sanctions imposed by the US during a speech at the People's Congress in Caracas. He stressed that the measures violate the right to trade freely and urged the International Criminal Court to issue a ruling on the lawsuit filed by Venezuela over what is described as crimes against humanity.
If the prosecutor's office and the International Criminal Court undertake a rigorous investigation, I'm sure they'll find out that those responsible are not only in Washington, but there are some of them in East Caracas as well. There are so-called Venezuelans here and in other parts of the world calling for sanctions and suffering against their own people.
And Venezuelan oil company PDVSA has rejected the US sanctions against Venezuela and Russia. The state-owned company expressed its rejection of the coercive measures announced on Tuesday by the US Treasury Department against the Russian oil company Rosneft, which maintains legal investments and commercial operations in Venezuela. According to PDVSA, the unilateral US sanctions policy has been targeting companies that compete in the global oil market, such as Rosneft, to try to influence the price system, control or eliminate competitors, and consequently exercise hegemonic control. Meanwhile, PDVSA workers remain permanently mobilized to defend the stability and normal development of administrative and operational activities that guarantee energy security for the Venezuelan population. And the Russian government has once again expressed its firm rejection of the unilateral measures with which the US seeks to impose global hegemony. In a statement, the Russian Foreign Ministry criticized the scope of US sanctions against Rosneft and a Swiss subsidiary of the Russian oil company. The statement adds that US sanctions have not and will not be able to influence Russian foreign policy, including interactions with the legitimate authorities of Venezuela, Syria, Iran, and any other country. At least 7 people died and 11 more were injured on Monday following the explosion of a car traveling along the Pan American Highway in Cauca Department in the southwest of Colombia. Cauca is immersed in a spiral of violence generated by territorial disputes between dissidents of the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia and the National Liberation Army guerrilla forces, and right-wing paramilitary groups and drug cartels.
Well, no, this is not an attack. It was a public transport vehicle that was traveling from Pasco towards Cali, and as it was moving, it exploded. As it was traveling, there was one vehicle in front of it and another behind. And at the moment that it exploded, the car in front and that behind also caught fire. All those who were traveling in the car that exploded were killed. There were 7 people inside the vehicle. Those who were in the 2 vehicles in front and behind were injured and taken to Rosas Hospital. It is an unusual event, and at this moment precisely the authorities are at the scene to verify the reason why the vehicle exploded while in motion, and they are undertaking all the procedures and tests needed to determine what really happened. The troops were more or less 1.5 kilometers away and arrived at the scene precisely at the time of the incident, as did the police, CTI, all to assist those injured.
Former Colombian Senator Ida Milano, who was detained in Venezuela on January 28th after escaping prison in Colombia, spoke exclusively with Semana magazine in a 2-hour interview from Caracas. In 2018, Milano was sentenced to 15 years in prison for corruption and illegal possession of firearms. Since her arrest in Venezuela, Milano has offered statements implicating the Colombian political class in widespread corruption and vote-buying schemes.
Former Senator Ida Milano shed light on intricate details of what seems to be an open secret in Colombia.
The Attorney General's office is run by the Chav family, and all of Colombia knows it, by Vargas Lleras too.
Milano said current President Iván Duque won the president by buying votes. According to her testimony, during the second round of the elections, Colombian authorities paid around 10,000 pesos to citizens to cast their votes for Duque. The total amount paid and spent on his electoral campaign was more than 6 billion pesos.
First, Julio bought votes to elect him. Not only Julio, but also the Cha family. And the Cha family handled all the traditional politicians who somehow ended up being bought by the Cha family. And the traditional leaders on the coast are in debt to the Cha family as well. They ended up buying the votes for him to be elected president of the republic. They were with Herman Vargas until the disastrous result they had in the first round. In the second round, Herman left the political scene, and then all the political machinery focused on supporting Duque, and everyone bought votes to elect Duque.
According to the former Congresswoman, President Ivan Duque knew that the political machinery was activated on the Atlantic coast to vote votes in his favor. The same applied to President Juan Manuel Santos, who was linked to the so-called men with a briefcase, who was a key figure in their payments to buy votes, including the votes to ensure his re-election as President of Colombia.
And meanwhile, the conservative Colombian Semana magazine recognized the failure of Bogota's strategy in the treatment of the Milano case.
It is sad to see that the biggest election corruption scandal in recent times in the Caribbean coast ends up with Maduro's as an ad hoc prosecutor. Justice in my country was not able to listen to Merlano and prosecute the real bosses of the vote-buying cartel to the fullest extent of the law. Maduro's justice has detained her and is listening to her. Maduro will be the one deciding on her extradition or deportation. Probably, the former congresswoman winds up being granted political asylum in Venezuela. At the end of the day, it is an open secret here in Colombia that some people would like to wipe her off the face of the earth so she can no longer speak.
The European Union on Tuesday put Panama back on its list of tax havens after deciding the country had not done enough to meet global transparency standards. Panama, along with the Cayman Islands, Seychelles and Palau, was added to the list of 8 other territories already deemed to be non-cooperative jurisdictions for tax purposes, according to the EU Council. Panama was previously removed from the list in 2018 and placed on a halfway grey list under close scrutiny after the EU accepted its promises to comply with rules on sharing tax information in the wake of the 2016 Panama Papers scandal. However, the EU has now considered that Panama did not implement the tax reforms to which it had committed by the agreed deadline. And protests have taken place in Panama against a visit by the Secretary General of the Organization of American States, Luis Almagro. Almagro travelled to Panama at the invitation of the Chamber of Commerce and Industry to receive an award for his valuable contributions to democracy in Latin America. However, he was received by social movements in Panama City with banners and flags supporting Latin American unity and denouncing his moves to support destabilization in countries such as Venezuela, Nicaragua, Honduras, and more recently, Bolivia. Almagro is widely considered a promoter of coups in the region. And coming up, we take a look at the electoral process in Bolivia. Don't go away. Welcome back. Bolivia's movement towards socialism has declared a state of emergency, denouncing that the Electoral Tribunal is attempting to eliminate the main candidacies of the party in the lead-up to the May 3rd elections, including those of Luis Arce for the presidency and Evo Morales for the Senate. The declaration came after the Electoral Authority announced Monday that it was postponing its decision on whether to accept or reject the candidacies of Arce, Morales and other mass candidates. According to the latest reports, challenges have been presented against 11 mass candidates. And our correspondent in Bolivia, Freddy Morales, brings us more on the developments there.
Almost 40% of the candidates nominated for different posts in the elections on May the 3rd have been excluded from the race, according to the Supreme Electoral Court. The numbers are as follows. 2,107 candidates were put forward. Of these, 1,278 have been approved. That means 797 are out. There is also a list of 13 candidates whose nominations are still subject to challenges, and about whom the Electoral Court says it will make an announcement as soon as possible. Among these is the candidate for senator from the Department of Cochabamba, Evo Morales, who has become the main target of the right, which organized the coup last November. They are filing several demands to have him ruled ineligible. The hierarchy of the Catholic Church, the 7 presidential candidates of the right, the civic committees of Santa Cruz and La Paz, and other sectors that supported the coup are all demanding that Evo Morales be excluded. Either they argue that he doesn't meet the residency requirement because he had to seek refuge abroad after the coup, or they simply demand he be ruled out without presenting any particular reason. So Evo Morales and the other 12 remain in suspense, and the Electoral Court has until this Friday to publish the new list of candidates and thus resolve their situation one way or the other. It's worth pointing out that of these 13 still in suspense, 11 are from Evo Morales' movement towards socialism, including the mass presidential candidate Luis Arce and the former Foreign Minister Diego Pare.
Brazilian oil workers have won a court battle for temporary suspension of the mass layoff of 1,000 Petrobras workers. The announcement came a day after Brazil's Superior Labour Court authorised the state-run Petrobras company to take disciplinary action against workers and their unions who've been undertaking industrial action for the past 18 days. The strikers are protesting mass layoffs and the Jair Bolsonaro government's privatisation of the state-run company. The Canadian public holiday known as Family Day, celebrated on Monday, was marked in the city of Toronto by solidarity actions calling for the Royal Canadian Mounted Police to leave Indigenous Wet'suwet'en 10 territory. Around 8,000 people marched to the Queen's Park Provincial Parliament, calling for respect for the Indigenous territory. Wet'suwet'en 10 chiefs are fighting to block a natural gas pipeline project across their ancestral lands. Similar demonstrations and round dances were held across the country as direct action to block key rail services continues. More than 100 doctors have signed an open letter calling for urgent medical treatment for WikiLeaks co-founder Julian Assange and warning that he could die behind bars in Britain, where he's subject to prolonged psychological torture. The letter, which was published by the Lancet Medical Journal, claims Assange is being denied medical care and expresses serious concerns about his physical and mental health. The doctors stressed that politics cannot be allowed to interfere with the right to health and the practice of medicine. Meanwhile, 2 Australian MPs who flew to the UK to visit the WikiLeaks founder have urged British Prime Minister Boris Johnson to block attempts to extradite Assange to the US. Thousands protested in Greece on Tuesday against the new pension reform as a 24-hour strike paralysed transport and services. Around 10,000 demonstrators gathered in the Greek capital against the reform, which means having to work longer for a pension. The strike action brought public transport in Athens, as well as intercity trains and ferry services, to a standstill. The new Conservative government says the reform, to be voted on this Friday, will make the troubled Greek pension system viable through 2070.
Everything is going downhill. His pensions will be at a lower level and we won't be able to meet our obligations. That is the most important thing. We rely on our country to cover our health security and provide for us when we are old. And all that seems to be in doubt now.
Zoran Milanovic was sworn in as the 5th president of Croatia on Tuesday. Milanovic said in his inaugural address that elections are a way of reaching a peaceful compromise between the wishes of different people, and that he will play a constructive role as president. For the first time, the inauguration ceremony took place at the official presidential residence in the capital of Zagreb, formerly known as Tito's Villa, after the leader of socialist Yugoslavia, for whom it was built in the 1960s. Farmers in fluorescent yellow vests blocked highways in southwestern Spain with tractors and other vehicles on Tuesday in the latest mass protest over what they say are plummeting incomes for agricultural workers. Several labour unions called for the protest rallies, predominantly in the Extremadura and Andalusia regions, to demand government action to ensure more realistic retail prices for fruit and vegetables. Protests against high production costs and low prices for farm produce are posing an almost daily challenge to Spain's month-old coalition government. The European Union plans to cut agricultural subsidies, and the United States is threatening to impose tariffs. And we're taking one last short break now, but stay with us for more. welcome back. Over 12,000 patients have been discharged from hospitals in China after recovering from COVID-19. According to Chinese health authorities, a total of 12,552 patients have recovered from the coronavirus so far. Meanwhile, the total number of confirmed cases in mainland China reached 72,436 on Monday. China's official death toll neared 1,900 on Tuesday. And Lu Ximing, director of the Wuchan Hospital in Wuhan, the epicenter of the COVID-19 outbreak, died on Tuesday morning after all efforts to save his life failed, according to Chinese state media. Tributes have been paid to the director, who worked tirelessly to contain the spread of the virus. And Russia has temporarily banned all Chinese visitors in the context of the coronavirus outbreak. Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin signed a decree on Tuesday evening prohibiting Chinese citizens from entering Russia for tourism, work and for private purposes. The new rules are effective from Thursday. The decision is the strongest measure yet taken to prevent the entry and spread of COVID-19 in Russia. Previously, Russian railways suspended all passenger traffic to and from China, and flights have been heavily restricted. In addition, border crossings in the Far East have been closed. And of the 12 confirmed cases of coronavirus in France, only 4 people remain in hospital, Health Minister Oliver Véran stressed on Tuesday.
We're prepared for a possible outbreak. We're prepared for any coronavirus situation, and we continue to prepare for any eventuality should the situation change. All the patients who were hospitalized at the Grenoble University Hospital were able to leave the hospital, including the family who had been contaminated, an English family. The father with his son were able to leave the Grenoble University Hospital. Not only are they no longer ill, but they are no longer carriers of the virus, which means that as of today, we are left with 4 people who are hospitalized, 3 people hospitalized in Lyon, and the 1 person hospitalized in Saint-Étienne.
An Arab lawmaker of the Israeli parliament ripped up a copy of the so-called deal of the century in protest against the move to suppress Palestinian sovereignty. In a speech on Monday before the Israeli parliament, Ahmed Tibi, leader of the Joint List Political Alliance, condemned the controversial Middle East peace plan presented by the administration of US President Donald Trump, stressing that the initiative ignores all the rights of Palestinians. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has undertaken a tour of African countries, which has so far seen him visit Senegal, Angola and Ethiopia. Pompeo met Ethiopia's Nobel laureate Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed on Tuesday in an effort to strengthen bilateral ties. Ethiopia is Africa's second most populous nation and is a key US security ally in the Horn of Africa. The US has encouraged Ethiopia to find a peaceful resolution to its dispute with Egypt over the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, which is nearing completion. Ethiopia says the dam is crucial in helping to lift many of its people out of poverty, while Egypt warns that the dam poses a threat to its Nile River water supply. 12 militiamen were killed in a clash with UN troops in the Central African Republic. The 12 members of an armed group died in a clash with UN peacekeepers and government troops in the northeast of the country, authorities reported on Tuesday. The fighting erupted on Sunday after the Popular Front for the Renaissance of the Central African Republic entered the town of Birao before being repelled. Cameroon's army described an incident in which 22 civilians were killed by a fuel explosion during a firefight in the northwest region as an unfortunate accident. Opposition parties accused the army of orchestrating a massacre, but army spokesman Colonel Cyril Antofat-Guillemot rejected the allegations. The United Nations reported that up to 22 civilians, 14 of them children, died in Friday's explosion, which occurred in the village of Nutambo in Cameroon's northwest region, one of 2 English-speaking regions that have been grappling with separatist violence since October 2017. Locust swarms have arrived in South Sudan, threatening crops. The South Sudanese government confirmed on Tuesday that the swarms of locusts have been wreaking havoc across East Africa and have now arrived in the country. The invasion continues to threaten more suffering in one of the world's most vulnerable nations. The scale of the current locust invasions threatening food security in several countries has been partly down to climate change. Niger's Touré community is holding its annual air festival in the northern Agadez region. The festival, considered one of the most important celebrations of this community, has been held since 2001. The activities include songs and dances, poetry readings, camel rides and games. The festival attracts artists from other regions of the country and nations across the world. More than 2 million Tuareg live in the Sahara Desert area, stretching across Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, Algeria and Tunisia. The 2019 World Cup rugby champion South Africa on Monday won the Laureus World Sports Team Award for Team of the Year at the award ceremony that was held in Berlin, Germany. It was claimed that the rugby team's victory united communities back in South Africa and was proof of sport's ability to change the world. The victory saw team captain Siya Kolisi become the first black captain to lift the Webb Ellis Cup.
We've really enjoyed every single part of it, and one thing that I'll never forget what Coach Raji said, it's really a privilege to play rugby in South Africa because you get to impact people's lives who don't play rugby, and it can bring a country together like we've seen in the past couple of weeks.
And finally, Cameroon will host the 2020 African Nations Championship in April. The 6th edition of this tournament, which exclusively features players from each country's respective national championships, will kick off on April 4th. The event will also serve as a warm-up ahead of the Africa Cup of Nations next year, an event that is known as the continent's showpiece football tournament. Cameroon will host the tournament for the first time ever. And we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Katrina Goss. Thank you for watching.